Hi, I'm Danny Ramos, and welcome to this week's edition of Hispanic Speak Out TV, brought to you by Hispanic Achievers and Bright House Cable on Channel 49 every Tuesday night at 9:30 p.m. for the past 8 years. First, we want to bring you our public service announcements. This is the Hispanic Achievers license plate, which came out this year. It's an official plate that you can get at 350 DMV offices, and you can have this plate put on your car just like a sports plate. But it's for the Hispanic community, and it's the only Hispanic plate in the entire United States, and it was passed by the Florida legislature last year. This plate, you can order it online at www.hispanicachievers.org, or when your renewal comes in, just go down to the Department of Motor Vehicles and request it, and you can have the plate the very same day. The revenues from this plate go to nonprofit organizations for scholarship grants for needy students throughout the state of Florida. So get your Hispanic Achiever plate. If you are Hispanic, naturally, this plate should be on your car. Second thing on our public service is this is the Lawyers Consumer Directory. The Lawyers Consumer Directory is distributed in 167 7-Eleven stores throughout Central Florida in the 6-county area. This book has attorneys listed, and it also tells you some facts about how to hire an attorney, what you need to know about foreclosure, and other important information. And it's absolutely free of charge in any 7-Eleven in the 5- and 6-county area of Central Florida. Our guest today is Tony Suarez. Tony Suarez is an extremely well-known lawyer. He was a state representative, and he's extremely active in the Hispanic community all of his life. Originally a New Yorker, he's been down here for 2 decades now, I believe, around 2 decades. And his offices are on Colonial Drive in Orlando. Welcome, Tony. How are you?
Thank you, Danny.
And my co-host, Jose Miranda, who used to be on the radio, and now he's the co-host of Hispanic Speak Out. How you doing, Jose?
Good. How are you?
Good. We have some conversation every time I invite you down here. We always have a good time because you always have some enlightening things to say, either politically or legally or various topics that we've discussed. A couple of things that we'd like to talk about. Number one, the situation it's now become a major campaign issue, which is religion and the state and the government of the United States that involves the health care bill. Okay? What is the pitfalls in that relationship? What is going on right now? Explain us, give us the background, and then what side of the fence are you on, based upon legal,
Right. Well, listen, we have had this struggle since the founding of this nation as deal with the First Amendment and in the proverbial separation of church and state. The Constitution, First Amendment, says the government may not establish nor may it prohibit the free practice of religion. Right. So between those two clauses, the establishment clause and the prohibition practice clause, those two clauses often find themselves in some sort of controversy. So whereas the government tries to do separation, when it tries to impose certain policies, they may get themselves involved. For example, when the government comes out and says, we'll close, all business must be closed on Sundays. All blue laws, as they used to call them. Well, why were they closing on Sundays? Because people wanted to have a day of rest. Well, where did that come from? From a religion or practice that closed on Sundays. Well, what about those people who practice the religion of the Sabbath is on Saturday? Well, it turns out that those Sunday blue laws were unconstitutional because they were an establishment of a religion and prohibited others from practicing their religion. Now we get to contraceptives. When the government says you must provide abortion services to all your employees, well, that's okay for regular business, but what happens to a Catholic organization or Christian organization who may be against abortion? They say you cannot force us to have abortion because that's against our religion and you're restricting our ability to practice our religion, and thus comes the tug and war. And that's what we have today, both abortion and now recently contraceptives has become an issue. So that's where we're at.
So they went around the back door, though. First it was mandated in the health care, and now they said they're taking a different approach through the insurance companies.
Right.
So it's not directly being mandated by government, right?
And they're still, of course, the Catholic Church in particular is still objecting to even that. because they're still, well, you may not require me to provide the contraceptives, but you require me to provide the insurance, which provides the contraceptives, so I'm still doing it. And that's where we'll have the rub. And I think that that's an issue that, it's going to have to be resolved politically. And then the court, someone's have to go to court to decide, ultimately the Supreme Court will decide whether it is and it's not an establishment.
Isn't it a fact that the Catholic Church has been operating this way forever, right, without having, and has been mandated to do all the things they're crying about right now to do without making a big squabble about it? And now the fact is that they receive funds from the government to operate, which would make them just like any other business.
Jose, I think you've hit it right on the nose. The problem is that the Catholic Church has been getting in through Catholic Charities, which is one of the biggest non-for-profit agencies in the country, providing many, many services. But then when they take government money, this is the problem. They can't have, in my opinion, when they start taking government money and then they apply it to their faith, well, I think you can't have it. No, go ahead, do it on your own. Provide all those services. Hire what you want. Give whatever rights. But when you start taking government money, then I think that you have to apply under government standards. And I think that that's when the churches start getting mixing, because when they start taking the government money, they're now subjecting themselves, and I think they have to subject themselves to the public will, because it's public money. Right. They're free to do it, whatever services, not provide abortion, not provide contraceptives, so long as they do it on their own practices, in my opinion. That's how, if I was on the Supreme Court bench, that's how I would cut the baby.
Yeah, I would think so too. And the fact is that, as you said, if they're collecting money for Medicare and Medicaid, they already crossed the line.
Right.
And we know that not all preventive things for health for women have to do with abortions. Right. It's necessary for them to live. And so, again, the church is stepping up into I know better than you kind of attitude. And I think...
Well, I think you could say they know better than us, the government, as to religious issues.
Okay.
All right? And I'll concede that to them. Do it your way. But don't ask me for my government money to do it your way, because I think at that point we're now establishing a religion. So by giving money to religions, I think we're violating the Establishment Clause. So that's where it all really gets muddled. When you're insisting on your First Amendment right, but then you turn around and say, give me money, public money.
Now, do you think that goes through when like Jose was saying, with Medicare and Medicaid?
Yes.
I think because Medicaid and Medicare is still government money.
Right.
So what you're saying is that in order for them to do that, what they want, they would have to give up all their Medicare money, all their Medicaid money, all government money.
Money.
Somebody walks in with a Medicaid card, no, we can't serve you.
No, you can serve them.
But without...
You just have to charge them.
You have to charge them.
If you want the government to pay for the services, then you have to provide the rules of the government.
Right.
Well,
it makes sense from the point of view of law, because it has
from
to
the
be
law,
distinct.
exactly, that's what happens. You see,
But
as a law professor, I can do it and cut the baby in these fine ways, but what actual and practical business, the reason why the Catholic Church in particular has been getting away with this is because they provide so many essential services. They're so big that without Catholic charities, for example, or so many of the Catholic churches, you would have a great dysfunction in society, and the result is that the governments often bend over. New York City, the New York City Church, New York City government has for years kowtowed to the church because they provide so many services to the homeless and to others that without the Catholic charities, they would have homeless staying all over the place, and the city doesn't want all the homeless, and they don't want to undertake the cost. So they say, let's give it to Catholic charities, but they say, well, under our conditions, and the city has to bend. Someone someday is going to bring a lawsuit, and then we'll see whether or not all these religious organizations accepting government money, whether or not that's considered an establishment.
So is this a political thing? I mean,
it's extremely political.
The politics are horrific here.
Is this about the Catholic Church trying to exercise its power again, and even in the face of the fact that they've paid billions of dollars to people who have been affected by priests who have attacked,
Right.
defenseless children over the years.
Right.
And this is the same Catholic Church who turned their backs during the Holocaust, okay, going all the way back. I mean, and even before that. So this is a church that somehow decided to dust off its little, vestas, its little doohickeys there, and started to vex a power that it shouldn't have.
Well, look, when we established this country, we had a constitution and we had a Declaration of Independence. All men are created equal. We said that, but we didn't mean that, because we established we had slaves. Even the guys who signed the Declaration of Independence had slaves. So it was a concept, an idea where America should go. So we can't condemn the Declaration of Independence because we had slaves. We eventually got rid of it, and we've been moving toward a greater freedom. And I think the church goes the same way. They have a mission of God and Christ, and that's wonderful, but it's driven by men, so they make mistakes. And among the mistakes that they're making is trying to follow the law of God and taking money from the government. I think that's wrong. I mean, Christ himself went into the temple and cleaned the temple out of the money changers, because the people who are managing the temple allowed the civilian government and money changers and crooks into the temple to do business. Mm-hmm. And I think that the church, as long as it takes money from the governments, it's having the money changers in the temple.
Can the church survive without government money?
I think the church needs to survive without government money. As long as the church is taking government money, they will have the situation when they're making deals, which will compromise the principles of the church in order to get the money. I think it's a very dangerous principle for the church.
And how does, when you say church, we're thinking religion.
Right.
Now let's think hospital.
Right.
Okay? Can that hospital survive, do you think, without government money? What would happen to Florida Hospital without government money?
Maybe it wouldn't have 5 buildings built by world-renowned architects. Maybe they would just be in smaller buildings providing modest to all poor people and everybody. Right. They don't have to have, the biggest growth industry in Central Florida has to be hospitals. Right. They're growing all over the place. And why? Because of Medicaid reimbursement and everybody being insured. I think they can survive. They did survive before Medicaid. Hey, there were hospitals before Medicaid. I wonder if anybody remembers that. But there were hospitals and there were doctors all before that came. Yeah. So, yes, they can survive.
Now, does this also go to people who hire on to hospitals? Are they required to give up their rights when they decide to work for the hospital?
Well, obviously that has to be in the contract. If the contract with the hospital says you must work on Saturdays, for example, and you're a Seventh-day Adventist and you observe the Sabbath on Saturday, if they're requiring that, well, then you have a choice. I will not take the contract, right, or I will cede my constitutional rights, ceding to what this contractor, the employee of the hospital, is saying to you. Right. So that becomes an issue. Now, can you, the Seventh-day Adventist, sue Florida Hospital? That's an interesting question, right? Mm-hmm. Can you, the Seventh-day Adventist, sue Florida Hospital, a Catholic organization or a Christian organization, that observes the Sabbath on Sunday because they're denying you your right? Well, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one.
That's another Supreme Court. Another lawsuit. It's another lawsuit.
Wow.
Yeah.
Why has you, being a renowned Republican also,
are you Republican or are you?
I'm an independent voter, okay, but I am a registered Republican.
Okay.
Well, putting your hat in another vein, why has this become such a political hotbed when it would almost appear on the surface that it's a non-issue?
Wow, because I think that Santorum has made it so. Santorum's platform, in order to differentiate himself from Romney. Romney's running as the fiscal conservative, but I'm a social moderate. Okay. Santorum is trying to capture a base of the Republican Party that doesn't really care about fiscal moderation. They're interested in the moral implications of public policy. And he's captured their imagination. Because he's saying what no one wants to say, that the ultimate, if you continue to use public pressure to to impose private rules, this is what's going to happen. Even something as popular as contraceptive, among 80%, these are numbers I'm told, 80% of Catholic women use contraceptive. It's a popular position. So, but the natural progressive thinking, if you take the conservative religious viewpoint of Santorum, that even contraceptives would be considered immoral, right, because it allows you to have sex for fun. God forbid you do that, you know. So because of that, horrible, it's becoming an issue because people can focus in on the natural, on the ultimate objective of conservative thought, and that's why I think it's captured the imagination.
So this is the religious right somehow, and it would, at least it appears during the Republican this process they're going through, and that the Republican right, which appears to be Christian, somehow wants to be the new Republican right?
Yeah, I think that the combination of the Tea Party, which basically started off as a fiscal conservative, but had lots of the social conservatives in it, right, is now morphed into the old social conservative movement. Right. And they believe the biggest problem in America is not the excess of money, spending money, but the morality of the country behind it, which includes spending money when you don't have. They consider that to be a immoral problem when you're spending money you don't have. And this country is doing that, very liberally.
Aren't the last time I looked, I thought we moved into the 21st century. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we sort of left behind Ozzie and Harriet, Leave It to Beaver. And yet we have a segment of the population that wants to roll the time back to the 1950s, to the white picket fences, and actually...
Because I actually think that was pretty good back then. It was good to have a mommy and a daddy and children, and that was good. Now we have television. A papi and a papi and a mommy, and we don't have children, and everyone is smoking grass, and people are on unemployment and say, listen, I have a right to 54 weeks of unemployment. And so some people are saying, Ozzie and Harriet, those are good time.
They weren't real. They weren't real.
Well, for some people it was. I mean,
No.
Yeah, look. I remember in New York.
The picket fence was a set.
No. We had a picket fence in our house, and we were in Queens, right after World War II.
Well, I got a picket fence when I moved out of the Bronx.
But that was the big rush after World War II in the 50s and 60s to go into Queens and go out to Long Island.
Right.
It was all full of picket fences.
That was the American dream.
That was the American dream coming true until the Vietnam War hit. Right. Then things changed. Right. Because all those kids that grew up with picket fences, they put uniforms. You're going in, whether you like it or not. Right. You're going to know. Right. So that was the death of the dream. Let's talk about this thing with this young boy that was shot. What's your take on that?
Well,
we're talking about the Sanford Police Department,
right?
And naturally, because we have a delayed broadcast, right, so let's talk in terms of not specifics of just the concepts of what happened.
Conceptually, and I've seen this story before, and I understand that Reverend Sharpton is coming on down to Orlando to do his civil rights thing. And all I can think, when I see him, and every time I see him on television, I think of Tawana Brawley. For those of you who've never heard of Tawana Brawley, let me tell you, in New York, Reverend Sharpton and his crew turned a small town upstate New York upside down on the allegations that the prosecutor was racist, that they were hiding a rapist, that he himself was a rapist, the prosecutor was a rapist, and that the whole town was a racist town. It turned New York State upside down. It turned that prosecutor's life upside down. He had to move. Terrible situation. It caused terrific grief in New York, all to be turned out that she was lying all along. But of course, he never apologized about what he did to that life of that prosecutor, nor to what he did to that city, that town in upstate New York, nor what he did to the state of New York, Poughkeepsie, right? And so he's here, and he's gone on as if all of a sudden he's a civil rights leader. To me, he's a racist, and he will always be that. And now he's coming down here on a case that we don't know the truth. We don't have the facts, but they have determined that this is a case of murder, and they're not going to rest until they get justice. Right, no justice, no peace. That was the call, right?
So your take is that the information has yet to be developed? I mean, I don't know. There's no
Clearly,
information.
I mean, if this is in Central Florida, if you spit the wrong way, you go to jail. I mean, here you drive with a license suspended, you go to jail. If they had any kind of evidence that this man was unjustifiably shot, he would have been arrested.
You don't think it's a cover-up?
No. Why would they cover up? I mean, I don't understand what the beginning of the reason for covering it up.
Okay, what's the law? You tell me the law.
State of Florida has, and that's a rather unique law, and we were discussing it off camera. Florida has the right to self-defense, like all states do, but Florida has a little twist to it. You do not have to retreat. We call it stand fast. You can stand fast when confronted with force. Other states, like New York, actually requires you to, before you can do deadly physical force, you must retreat. And you may have to retreat even in your home. I think they changed that in New York, that if in your home, you don't have to retreat. But in New York, even in your home, at one time, you have to retreat. Florida has taken a very aggressive position on that. No, you do not have to retreat when confronted with force. You can stand your ground. Now, the use of deadly physical force still is required that you believe that you're going to be have deadly physical force yourself. Right. So if you come at me with a pen and say, you know, I'm going to stab you, I probably could not use deadly physical force against you in those circumstances. If I want to slap you and I come and want to slap you, I could not use deadly physical force. I have to use deadly physical force only when confronted with deadly, and I don't have to retreat. Now there is what happened. Since no one was there but Mr. Zimmerman.
But where was the deadly response? I mean, this guy had a gun. He didn't have anything.
Right.
So where is the interpretation by the Sanford Police Department that guard, or whatever you want to call him, was threatened with death?
I don't know, because I don't know the statements. All this stuff is not public. You know, they don't have the results of all the results. I have no idea. That's why I just wait. I haven't accused anybody of anything because I don't know. Unlike Reverend Sharpton, who already knows all the facts, because of course he's a reverend and he's close to God. So someone has given him facts that no one else seems to know.
Well, there's a 9/11 tapes that the Stanford Police Department has put out, which clearly indicates that the only thing that Mr. Zimmerman knew about this young man was that he was black.
Okay.
Okay, and Zimmerman was in his home, and that the young man was walking away from him, and that the 9/11 tapes clearly indicate that Mr. Zimmerman was physically outside his home now, following him, and that in addition to following him, the dispatcher said, "Are you following him?" And you can hear the guy breathing, and he says, "Yes, I am." He says, "We don't want you to do that." Clearly, this is an indication that the police department does not want him to further engage. All right. And on top of this, Mr. Zimmerman is well known to the police department because, according to their own numbers, since January, only since January. Now we're just, we're towards the end of March now. He has called the police department over 46 times. All right? And
yeah, well, Jose, that you got to separate.
I'm waiting for the incriminatory evidence.
What I'm saying to you is these are all things that...
Are these circumstantial?
Circumstantial at best.
That he's a vigilante? That he's a nutcase that likes to follow people? That he's maybe paranoid?
If the law says you can stand your ground... If I follow you, I'm no longer standing my ground, am I? That's my question.
Well, the question is immediate. That's the question. Let's assume this fact pattern can happen. He went out to the guy. He tells him, "Hey, what are you doing here?" And the kid tells him, "Get out of my face. I'm not talking to you." And it gets to a point where, "Oh, well, you have to talk to me." And then the kid says no. And then he slaps him. Because what evidence we do have is that there was blood on the lips of Zimmerman, and there was grass on his back. So obviously he was on the back. He was on his back. There was some sort of tussle, and he's bleeding. So some of his testimony could be that corroborated. Now, at the question that's going to be asked, and what's going to have to be done when they do the grand jury, at the time of whatever confrontation, whatever statement, we don't know the statement of Zimmerman, but at the time of the confrontation, was Zimmerman believing that his life was in danger, so much so that he had to use the gun? That's going to be the question. Because if it did not have a reasonable belief...
So you're saying that the lead-up is no?
No, leading up to doesn't mean nothing. All he was, at best what you have is, and I have guys like this, clients that they just are too much. They just are excessively police oriented, and so maybe he discriminated against. If he's black, he must be looking around for trouble. Maybe that's right, but that's not against the law. It's just a bad attitude on the guy, Zimmerman's part. But whether he now violated the law, we won't know until there's a clear examination of his testimony compared to the physical evidence. People are saying, for example, that they've heard 2 shots on that tape. Well, if there were 2 shots and we already have the gun of Zimmerman and Zimmerman's gun only fired 1, where did the shot come from? But we don't know. We just don't know. And I'm not ready to condemn Zimmerman, and I'm not ready to condemn the young kid, because I don't know. And I think that that's what's wrong with the system, that right away everyone starts jumping into it because they perceive a wrong, and now everyone gets antagonistic, and I'm got antagonistic because I know Sharpton. And so that this is what's bothersome.
Do you think that this can escalate into something really unwarranted? If you're an urban person,
Right.
you come from big cities, and there's always hotheads. Do you think it might escalate?
It sure could. It really could.
Especially
escalate.
with these guys coming down.
Yeah, I mean, really could. Especially with all these guys coming down, it really could escalate. I could see young African American children deciding to get an attitude and take it out on other kids. White kids. I could see white kids all of a sudden feeling defensive and taking attitudes in the black. And this is what's wrong. Instead of having peace. That's what Martin Luther King would never have done it this way. Martin Luther King would never have done this kind of he would have been looking for peaceful ways, not for confrontational ways.
Well, I saw Corinne Brown on CNN, and she had a much better approach. Her approach was analytical. This happened, it looks like this, but we have to get the facts straight. And she had a good handle on it. I mean, she doesn't need Sharpton, and she doesn't need Jesse Jackson coming down here.
And I think it's our local leaders who should be handling this matter rather than importing people who have their own agenda.
Yeah, they have a political agenda, obviously, to keep their machinery going on a nationwide basis. We are the protectors, that kind of thing. But Corinne Brown, I can't quote her because I don't remember exactly what she said. But my impression was, she's a black woman, she's a congresswoman. She she called for the Department of Justice to do an independent investigation. Right. I have no problem with that. I think that's warranted.
Of course.
Okay?
Some young man died. Someone's dead. A young 17-year-old kid is dead. It demands a sincere and severe investigation.
And obviously, nobody trusts the Sanford Police Department because of the circumstance.
Right.
Valid or not. So you need an outside source to come in that has the technology, for example, to take those tapes and listen to what was being said in the background and evaluate the gunshot. At what point in the language? Because, the FBI will be able to pull up those tapes and be able to clearly see what that language was, which hasn't been done yet. And then synchronize it with the gunshot, the language in the gunshot, to determine something more tangible than what we have now.
And I think that one of the things that they've already suggested, we're looking earlier, as presenting this to a grand jury, it's got too much pressure on the prosecutor in order for him to make a decision on his own. Either way, he's going to be criticized if he doesn't bring charges or if he does bring charges.
He's cooked.
The best way is put it to the grand jury. If a grand jury believes that there is not enough evidence, they will not charge, because there's anonymous in there. And if they believe there is evidence, then they will charge, and then Mr. Zimmerman will have to face a jury of his peers. But we'll see how that happens. But I think that's the way it should handle. Put it to the grand jury with evidence that exists. Obviously, whomever wants to investigate this, whether it's FDLE or whether it's the Department of Justice, let them do a fair job, because the community deserves that. But hotheads coming in and demonstrating and stirring up the pot, I think that really creates problems. It could create more problems. It's going to harden feelings in our community unnecessarily.
Okay. Don't forget that on April 7th, we have the Immigration Summit at the Downtown Sheraton Hotel. We have some really, really great panels. Admission is free, so come to the Immigration Summit at the Downtown Sheraton on April 7th, starting at 7 o'clock in the morning. It's going to run all day. Admission is free. This is Danny Ramos on Hispanic Speak Out. It's been lively, like all the time. Every time you come down here, you got something to say that, but in the end, people agree with you. That's the legal background. Hispanic Achievers and Hispanic Speak Out TV, we will see you next Tuesday night at 9:30. Thank you so much for joining us.